Hello, and welcome to the Pod People, Milwaukee's most metal show where we like loud music and we hate skateboard parks in our backyard. And we're here to talk about our favorite director, Robert Zombert. I'm Matisse Van Rossum, and I'm joined by those other rad dudes, Ben Sheets.
Aye.
And Eugene Lundeen.
Howdy there, folks. Hope you enjoy your complimentary fried chicken for tonight. We sent them in the mail, so whoever's listening, better be munching on down.
Now, are you trying to tell me that y'all gonna fuck those chickens? Well, we're back with another full-length episode, and in case you didn't guess it, we're doing another director retrospective, where we're talking about Rob Zombie. We've already shared some of our thoughts on this eccentric musician and filmmaker.
This dirty man.
This dirty street hippie in our Halloween episode, but now we're coming at you with reviews of 3 of his other more well-known films. We don't have any news this week because there's nothing exciting in the news and we're not going to bore you with nonsense, so we're just going to jump right on in. And we're going to start with Rob Zombie's directorial debut, House of a Thousand Corpses. So I had never seen this movie before we watched it, and I had only heard bad things, like exclusively bad things, so I was expecting a very unpleasant viewing experience, but I was pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, past few episodes I've been talking shit about this movie. It came up and surprised me. I think the last time I saw it was probably in high school. Some of the things that didn't work as well for me back then work a little better now. There's still some big problems with it that I still have.
I wouldn't put anybody under the illusion that this is a good film.
I think this is an enjoyable film to see in a group, especially.
I mean, prior to this, I had only seen Rob Zombie's Halloween remake and the sequel, which are both very dark, morbid, depressing drags. I was very surprised at how campy and over the top and like 70s exploitation this movie was. I was laughing for a good majority of it, and that was a very, very pleasant surprise to me because I expected to just be like, fuck, end my life at this point, you know?
It almost has like a 60s exploitation vibe to it, where it almost feels like a Roger Corman movie.
Oh, yeah,
yeah. It doesn't take itself too seriously. They do some of the scenes, type of same tropes as, like Texas Chainsaw Massacre, for example, with the dinner scene. So it's a weird blend of, these 70s influences, and you see even more of in Devil's Reject. We'll get to that. But that mixed with kind of 60s camp, like
Well, we should explain a little bit of what the plot is in this movie. It revolves around these 4 20-somethings. This also takes place in the 70s.
Yes,
if I remember.
77, correct.
Yes. And all these youngsters are going around the country, and I guess they're writing a book on like roadside attractions. Just all the weird pit stops that you could find, and they come across this man, Captain Spaulding, played by Sid Haig.
Everybody's favorite bug-eyed, horse-toothed, crazy person.
Yeah.
Sid Haig single-handedly convincing me that clowns aren't actually that bad.
Yes, he is in clown makeup pretty much through the entire movie.
He takes a much smaller role in this film than I expected because I had never seen Devil's Rejects either, and of course we'll get into that, but I know that he's like one of the central characters of Devil's Rejects. I had always known that, and I was expecting him to play that same kind of role in this one, but really his like big part in House of a Thousand Corpses is just in like the opening setup. He's in a relatively small amount of this movie.
His main role in this movie is he runs this haunted house ride sort of thing, like a tour of murder, which like a Ripley's Believe It or Not kind of like little tiny shop that also has a haunted house ride in it.
and sells wings.
and chicken wings. They even say on the sign that advertises gasoline and chicken wings. So it's like a gas station, roadside attraction, haunted house, chicken joint.
So these four guys, which I don't remember their names. I just know that the main two guys are played by Rainn Wilson and Chris Hardwick, looking a healthy, chubby man.
Yeah, Chris Hardwick used to be kind of chunky.
Yeah.
I mean, this was filmed in 1999, but didn't get its release until 2003. It got kind of bogged down. But I was surprised in the opening credits to see how many names I recognized.
Yeah.
Like, I knew to expect Sid Haig and Sherry Moon Zombie, but also Rainn Wilson, Chris Hardwick.
A pre-office Rainn Wilson.
Pre-office Rainn Wilson, a young Walton Goggins.
Yeah.
I was surprised to see all of these names that I recognized. Man, this movie is just so over the top. Like, everybody's acting is just garbage.
Yes, well, Sid Haig in this haunted house tour, the final person that they've because it's like all about these murderers from history, like
serial killers like Albert Fish and
Ed Gein
and Ed Gein and
the final one is what sets off this whole movie is a guy called Dr. Satan.
A crazy person who was trying to use medical science to turn mentally handicapped people into super soldiers. The kind of film that could not be made in 2018, everybody.
Yes. Yeah, and I forgot exactly how he was murdered.
He was supposedly hung by a lynch mob close by to this shop.
But his body disappeared from the graveyard.
So Sid Haig sends this group of youngsters on sort of a wild goose chase to go find the tree where he was hung. And that sort of sets off the whole thing where they end up being kidnapped by a sadistic Manson family style group. Also very reminiscent of Texas Chainsaw, like you mentioned, Ben. I think it's pretty obvious based on this movie and Devil's Rejects that Rob Zombie is a big fan of Tobe Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
It feels like a homage, but at the same time, he's doing much different things with it.
Yes.
And I think in terms of scares, it's nowhere near as effective.
Oh, no. Well, I mean, Texas Chainsaw is a legitimate masterpiece of a film as far as I'm concerned. Like, very serious, dark, scary, gruesome. This film is comparable only in premise, I think. It does the same kind of thing where it sets up this crazy murder cannibal family who have a house full of like weird macabre decorations, but it just sends it like up into the stratosphere of camp.
Yeah.
I love how it sets it all up with the very opening scene before we're even introduced to the youngsters, where a couple of thugs try to rob Captain Spaulding's whatever it's called, and Sid Haig just fucking blows their brains out.
I have to say, Sid Haig isn't in much of this movie, but he steals the show in every scene he's in.
Well, I mean, that's just the thing about Sid Haig. Like, he's so fucking good, and he pulls off that over-the-top, like, pun intended, clowny redneck. He just does that shit so well that it's like, even the fact that his dialogue is hot garbage because Rob Zombie cannot write dialogue to save his life, it works with Sid Haig.
Yeah, well, and in both of these movies, he hits kind of a perfect balance of funny, but at the same time, kind of intimidating.
Oh, he gives you the idea of he's just a total crazy person. He will kill you at a moment's notice.
Yeah.
I love Sid Haig, and he fucking carries basically every movie that he's in, as far as I'm concerned.
A big source of the camp in this movie comes from the editing.
Yes, that's a big deal.
The editing of this movie is buck wild. Like, they use copious amounts of colors and inverted color transitions, and
Well, yeah, that's really the big thing. Probably maybe every like 5 or 10 minutes in this movie,
at least
there will be a short 5 to 10-second clip of members of the family just spouting nonsense, which
Well, it's
apparently
like-
was all shot in Rob Zombie's basement.
Well, that's some of it, but there's a lot of like, I would describe them as Scooby-Doo style scene changes where there's like these weird, super brief little transitions of some kind of imagery that's not that related to anything that's going on, you know? Like, just like they do in Scooby-Doo where it's like, you know, and they change between the scenes. And or when we were watching this movie, both of you guys described the editing as obnoxious. I want to get into that a little bit because I do think that obnoxious is a good word, but for me, it worked really well considering the camp of the movie.
I think tedious is really...
worked, but the problem is there was way too much of it. The movie isn't long as is. It's under an hour and a half. It's like 88 minutes. But I would say a solid 20 to 30% of this movie is those interludes. So, like, that's a little too much.
I like, it really didn't bother me. Like, I think this film in terms of plot is so inconsistent as it is that it feels to me like a haunted house. Like, you stand in line for a while, which is the build-up, and then you go into the house, and every room is totally different and clashes completely. There's no transition between one or the other. But if you're in the right mood, it's still super fun, and you come out of the whole experience just kind of like giggling because of how ridiculous and silly it is. And that is what this movie feels like to me in a nutshell. It's like going through a haunted house at Halloween time.
I like that analogy, and I think it works for the movie, but I don't feel like it works for me for the transitions. The transitions for me almost feel more like Rob Zombie's doodles in between in between scenes, and you know, that may add to the aesthetic. You could argue that, but like at the same time, it doesn't make the movie any more focused. And I feel like the biggest problem with the movie is it's not very focused.
It's incredible.
Super scattershot, which works for the haunted house feel. I'll give you that. It works well for that, but as a whole, it kind of takes away from the movie.
Well, I feel like if you're going into this expecting narrative focus in general, you're going to have a real bad time because you're absolutely right. Like, it is the farthest thing from focused. Like, it's changing what it's doing every like 10 minutes or so, you know? But what I like about it is that it establishes a precedent for that early on. It's different for every person, but for me, it didn't get frustrating because it's like, okay, I'm fucking strapped into this bullshit crazy ride and I'm just gonna ride it out until the end and get whatever enjoyment out of it I can. If I was going into this looking for like a solid, well-written, serious like horror film, I think I would be infuriated.
Well, you can
end.
have like well-written and serious they aren't really the same thing. It can still have a cohesion with all of it and still be balls to the wall. I think the biggest problem is there's that setup that these, I mean, I don't want to say teenagers because they're 20-somethings.
No, they're 20-somethings. Yeah, for sure.
And they get abducted by this family, these crazy looking people.
The Firefly family.
Yes, the Firefly family. Once it gets to that point, there's really nothing else to add tension or to move ahead the story. It's just them stuck in this house getting tormented.
That's another thing, you know, like it feels like, you know, a haunted house ride, but the thing about haunted house rides is sometimes they take you by surprise. I don't feel like I was ever really that surprised.
I would agree with you up until like the last 20-ish minutes.
It gets buck wild.
It goes in a totally different direction than you're expecting. I just would straight up not classify this movie as torture porn, but I would consider it like proto torture porn, minus all of the gore and stuff, where like a good chunk of the movie is just these poor hapless dolts being tormented by these psychos.
The reason it's saved for me is the lack of self-seriousness. Like,
yes.
I think the fact that it's kind of pretty self-aware and it's very campy lets me give it a pass for how kind of almost nihilistic it is, in that like you have the setup, you know how it's gonna end. More so than like other movies of the same ilk. Like he hits those same notes right on the money. And I think the reason it works is it's so campy that it feels like homage to like your Roger Corman blood
Yes.
freak type of horror movies.
That's the thing. Like, the whole time I was watching this movie, all I was thinking was homage. Like, this is obviously somebody who grew up watching really campy, over-the-top exploitation horror films of the late 60s and early 70s from a very young age, obviously. And like, that's Rob Zombie. Like, the dude is basically the human embodiment of Halloween, you know? Like, the dude is a fucking living haunted house. And you even get that in his music, which, I mean, I love Rob Zombie's music. I like White Zombie, and I even like his solo stuff. It's just so over the top and ridiculous. You get the same kind of feel from House of a Thousand Corpses that you get from his music, which I think might turn some people off, and maybe is why people put so much hate on this movie, because they might not know Rob Zombie's music and like the origin of his career, and they're like, oh, I watched Halloween and so I wanted to check out early Rob Zombie, and then they watch House of a Thousand Corpses, which is like a totally different beast, you know?
Well, that's a problem too. Anyone that watched Halloween thought that was a good movie, and then
Right, well, it's
try and watch something else like that.
It's not, but it is the kind of movie that appeals to the general American horror audience, I think. You know, like, not particularly smart, but just dark and gritty and slashery with a lot of gore. It's like, that gets a lot of people off, and they're not looking for much more. And it's not a great movie, but when you try to compare it to, like, this is his early work, it's really like a total far cry. You know, they're two totally, completely different things. And this has much more of the self-awareness and that sort of exploitation-y, Halloween-y campiness. Like, this is a dude who grew up watching fucking Vincent Price movies and TV shows and shit,
Yeah.
you know? Like, that's very obvious from this movie.
It definitely feels like two ends of a spectrum. So on one side you have complete camp, which I think this movie is very close to. And
Yes.
on the other side you have complete self-seriousness, which is probably Lords of Salem, which we'll get into. And I think his style works best when it's somewhere near the middle. I think Devil's Rejects probably gets to that stuff the best, in my opinion, where like it's camp, but like it doesn't feel like the characters are in on the joke as much.
Well, another interesting thing, at least about the production of this movie, is that like the Firefly family house where they shoot most of it is the same house that is used in The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, which is something that, like, if you go to Universal Studios in California and you take the tram ride, which goes through all the backlots and stuff, like, that's a house that you pass along the way. The funny thing is while they were filming this, Universal refused to stop the tram tours, so they could only shoot this in the house around the tours.
Oh my god.
So if they were shooting during the day at all, they would have to keep cutting and just stopping production completely for a fucking tour to go by, and then they would get back to doing it. But at the same time, the fact that they shot this on the fucking Universal Studios backlot just sort of adds to that campiness, I think, that makes it so entertaining. Where it really becomes a problem for me, well, there's a couple of parts where it really becomes a problem for me, but like the beginning setup is fantastic, And then there's a huge chunk of rather boring downtime.
Yeah, I think the first 15 minutes are probably maybe some of the best in the movie.
Yeah.
The end is pretty good too, but that fucking Captain Spaulding opening is
Sid Haig
amazing.
Sid Haig carries the first bit of the movie for sure.
Well, the big problem is once the kids get abducted, there's a subplot of one of the girls' fathers trying to find them. And just really uninteresting. Like, they show that one of the cops, played by Walton Goggins, talking to Captain Spaulding, sort of trying to figure out what happened, but it's really just not interesting. And when it finally reaches its resolution, it's like, oh, I didn't really care otherwise, and I sort of knew this is what this is what was gonna happen.
Because they talk to Captain Spaulding, then they find a car out in the boonies with a corpse in the trunk, then they go right to the Firefly house, and then they just get killed immediately. Like, it's kind of pointless.
It feels like that subplot was totally added just to pad out the running time, which is funny because it's already padded out so much by those transitions.
Yeah,
it makes me think about like how short this movie would be without all that shit. Probably like 30 to 40 minutes.
Well, I think before we get into the ending stuff, which is important to talk about because it takes a hard left turn, I think we should take a few minutes to go over some of the characters in this movie because they're pretty central, and especially transitioning into the Devil's Rejects. Aside from Sid Haig's clownish Captain Spaulding.
Yeah, so you have a whole family. You have a cast of characters. You have Sherry Moon Zombie.
Her character's name is Baby, which is kind of weird, but she does have this weird childlike babyishness, which is juxtaposed with like her sex appeal, which is kind of bizarre, and
she's very horny
creepy.
for Ryan Wilson.
Yeah, she wants to smash Rainn Wilson, definitely. But, like, she talks in this really high-pitched, babyish voice with a very thick Texas accent. I mean, of course, you quickly realize that she's a sadist just as much as the rest. But you've got her, you've got Bill Moseley as her older brother, who in this film is an albino, but is not in The Devil's Rejects.
No, he's just very pale-skinned. And
we'll get into that. But he seems to sort of be the mastermind behind all of this torture stuff. Like, after he kills Rainn Wilson, he turns him into like a mermaid tableau.
Yeah,
where you're like,
I found really funny.
I thought it was pretty funny too. He's like sews him to a big old fish. That's a pretty funny scene. You've got the mother character
played by Karen Black
in the first one. Yes. She doesn't return in Devil's Rejects.
But legendary actress, was in like 5 Easy Pieces and a bunch of other great movies from the 70s.
She does a really good job in this too. I mean, everybody's hamming it up. Like, nobody is taking this particularly seriously. You've got the fucking grandpa. There's that weird scene after they invite the kids to dinner where they do that like talent show where Sherry Moon Zombie lip syncs, and the grandpa does like a stand-up comedy set where he basically just screams most of it.
I forgot about that. And like all the kids, they're in love with it. And like Chris Harvey's going like, wow.
He's losing his shit.
He was like, oh, this is great.
Are you seeing Sherry Moon's lip syncing? Wow.
And then you've got the tiny character who's like a giant deformed guy who they say was burned in a fire set by their father, which is not established as Sid Haig in this movie, but that's another thing they retcon in Devil's Rejects.
Well, no, they do mention it towards the end.
Well, there's the one other guy who they call Rufus Jr., as in named after the father, but the father turns out to be Sid Haig, which is Captain Spaulding. You know, they all sort of have these assumed identities, but it's never really explicitly stated. They kind of make it seem like the father in the first one is no longer around because he went crazy and set the house on fire and Tiny got burned or whatever. But I mean, that's not even that important. I love the scene in the middle where I think it's either Rainn Wilson or Chris Hardwick's girlfriend is like chained to the bed in the basement, and Tiny comes down and he's eating cereal, really gross looking cereal out of a dog bowl, and she's just like, "Let me go," and he just like he just lets her go. He just unties her, and she like gets up and starts to walk out, and he just kind of waves at her, and then as she's on her way up the stairs, Bill Moseley comes down and recaptures her. I thought that scene was really funny.
You know what the production design of this movie kind of reminded me of, oddly, was Mother's Day. A lot of
a little bit. This kind of like inconsistently mishmashed house.
Yeah, just like a bunch of like crazy dumb shit thrown at the walls.
Well, I
covered.
mean, to return to my previous analogy, the house does feel like a literal haunted house, though.
Especially near the end once things really start to kick up.
Let's go ahead and jump into that.
Spoilers territory.
Spoilers for a fucking 18-year-old movie. You know,
the father and the cops, they fail in trying to retrieve the kids, and
they get murdered. That very weird,
long,
super unnecessarily long slow-mo shot where Walton Goggins is just on his knees while Bill Moseley points a gun in his face, and they just zoom out for like 45 seconds to a minute before he actually shoots him.
I was worried that
that was weird.
The movie froze or something, but no, it just wanted to take that long.
That was a weirdly long
Very
shot.
indulgent.
Yeah, but the surviving kids, because at this point Rainn Wilson he's been like turned into some weird like taxidermy sort of thing.
Mermaid.
Mermaid.
Merman.
Excuse me. I wouldn't try to assume anybody's gender.
Oh God, I forgot, because I know it's Chris Hardwick and his girlfriend left at the end, but I forget what happened to the other.
Was that the scene where Sherry Moon Zombie had the chainsaw and was dancing around a brick house?
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah, and all the weird transitions that were apparently filmed afterwards in Rob Zombie's basement on 16 millimeter that showed like the torture scenes, and there's just the one where I think that's just when Chris Hardwick is getting tortured.
Oh yeah, you're
to
right.
death.
That's Chris Hardwick.
And Sherry Moon Zombie's just dancing to Brick House, and they keep cutting back to that. Right. That was really funny.
Yeah, I'm having trouble remembering what happened to that other girl, because I know she was. I know it doesn't matter, but I'm just fucking blanking on it.
Well, she does.
Oh wait, she runs away
into
the graveyard, and Sherry Moon Zombie stabs the shit out of her.
Well, that's after she discovers Dr. Satan.
No, that's
that's before.
Oh yeah.
Well, the point is that they set up this whole sacrifice thing where they put these folks into a coffin and lower them into this big hole in the ground while playing a slowed down recording of a poem by Aleister Crowley. Then when they're in the coffin, they get attacked by what I assume is supposed to be Dr. Satan's superhuman monsters, which are basically just mud zombies.
Yes, right. They just they emerge from the muck that the coffin is hanging over. Also, Chris Hardwick and his girlfriend are dressed up in like bunny.
The bunny costumes, which I never quite figured out why they're dressed as bunnies.
Well, because like they make weird allusions to like rabbits and stuff, like chasing your little rabbit, but it's not like you can't just put that in there and like, we're going to accept it. Like, you gotta earn it, and it doesn't really
make any sense. But they're dressed up as Easter bunnies, and Chris Hardwick's girlfriend escapes into these tunnels and finds this weird,
which we don't see how, because the coffin is like hanging above all this muck. Chris Hardwick gets pulled down into it, and she's left on there, and then it just cuts away, and she's walking down these halls.
I mean, you kind of see one of the muck zombies peering out from like a hole in the wall, so I guess it's supposed to be assumed that she crawled into that hole, but we don't see it.
I guess, right? Yeah, that she.
I mean,
she did some swing Indiana Jones stuff and swung over to it.
That's the way my brain tried to rationalize it, but she finds this like enormous underground torture mansion.
Well, after actually I don't remember. Is this before or after she goes down that hallway, which is I guess where the 1,000 corpses
oh yeah, it's just a bunch of skeletons.
Right, which is like that's literally something you'd see in a haunted house.
And after a random homeless guy shows up and rips her bunny costume off.
Oh yeah, that's
what
right.
was
Just some
that
dude
about?
just rips it off and then just walks away. And it's not Dr. Satan. It's not anyone else in the family.
Well, she does in the torture mansion find Dr. Satan, he looks absolutely like a guy that you would find in a haunted house.
Yeah, he looks like a Dr. Satan.
He looks just about what you would expect Dr. Satan to look like.
Oh yeah, and he's poking around in Chris Hardwick's brain, just digging his fists in there.
And it's all super red lit and spooky. Like that part felt the most like a haunted house to me. It's like you walk in, you're like, oh, this is so scary. I'm just gonna walk out this door and go into the next room. And she gets chased by that dude in the gas mask who has the big axe.
Oh my god, yeah, right.
And then she crushes him because he has bad double vision and swings his axe into support on the tunnel. I mean, I don't have a whole lot to say on that whole sequence other than it's very campy and stupid.
Well, yeah, that can describe a lot of the movie, just campy and stupid.
But this feels like the most inconsistent part from the rest of the movie, where it goes from just like crazy Manson murder family to like underground mud zombies, which does not quite fit in. But then she manages to escape and runs into Sid Haig driving down the road. And he picks her up in his fucking Corvette and he's driving down the road like, oh yeah, we'll get you to a hospital. And then Bill Moseley sits up in the back seat.
Yeah.
Like there's no way when she was getting into the car she would not have noticed Bill Moseley laying down in the back seat. Like she 100% would have seen him back there.
And what's great too is like the camera keeps doing these like sudden zoom ins to Bill Moseley's face.
Oh yeah, that's real 70s. The rapid punch-ins that are all
he moves
over
up,
the movie.
Zoom in. He turns his head and zoom in. And then he has a knife and he's about to stab, and then it goes again into just like that super like overload of visuals, like, and it looks like I guess she's tied up, like she's been captured again by the family, and Dr. Satan's like poking around and stuff. It's all in close-ups, just like really loud.
Right.
And
then it just ends.
And it ends, yeah.
Well, it's like, okay, the payoff at the end is that Sid Haig is part of the family, Captain Spaulding. I mean, maybe that was a surprise when the movie first came out, but in hindsight, like, of course, everybody knows that Captain Spaulding is a part of this crazy murder family.
It feels like, I mean, especially with Halloween, and certainly with all the other movies we watched, I mean, Rob Zombie might not really know how to end movies.
Oh, well, we'll for sure be getting into that, because Rob Zombie absolutely does not know how to end movies. But let's go ahead and rate this before we transition into the Devil's Rejects. Eugene, do you want to start?
Yeah,
We'll go
so
around?
as we've mentioned countless times, and as you may tell by how we brushed off a lot of explaining the plot of this movie.
There's no real plot.
There's no real plot, and to talk about it would be really boring. And so we just sort of wanted to get across this idea that, well, it's meant to be this, like, macabre, I think is the right word for this sort of thing, and what Rob Zombie seems to do. Just, like, very goofy...
Rob Zombie absolutely jerks off to skeletons.
Yeah. He just seems to have a real fascination for all like this. It has a levity to the whole thing because Rob Zombie knows that like you, as you said countless times, like a haunted house ride. I mean, it's meant to scare you and also make you laugh at the same time. Because every haunted house, it's usually very goofy. It's your it's usually your uncle or something hiding out in a corner waiting to pop out with a mask on. So
yeah, a dude runs at you with a chainsaw without a chain on it, and
Right.
you're, oh, it scared me for a second, but ha ha ha, wasn't that so much fun?
And while like the dialogue and all this is just really dumb and the story goes nowhere, for what it tries to go out and accomplish, I think that for the most part it's pretty successful. It landed on 1.5 of its feet. So
Sure.
for that, for anyone that is looking for, I'd say something along the lines of like Thanksgiving, where it's just you're watching it knowing that it's not going for anything greater than entertaining for a short amount of time. So I'm gonna give it a 2.5 for that. I don't think I can go too much higher because it's still just like it's a bad movie, but definitely one still worth checking out.
Yeah, I mean, I will agree that it's not a good movie by any means, but the amount of enjoyment that I got out of watching it was such a pleasant surprise to me. It's super inconsistent, super dumb, super campy, but very self-aware at the same time. I mean, to say the same thing a million times, it's like a fun haunted house ride where it's not really scary, but you appreciate the effort that they put into it, and you get a good couple of laughs, and you come out of it feeling like you just had a good, fun time. The editing doesn't bother me too much because it's so just like 60s, 70s exploitation campiness, just absolute ridiculous bullshit. And it was really fun for me. Because of my enjoyment, I'm going to give it a 3.5 out of 5.
Well, I have changed my opinion on this movie a little bit. When I first saw this, I was kind of expecting a scary movie. I hadn't really seen anything by Rob Zombie beforehand, and I was very underwhelmed with that. But this time I knew what I was getting into. I knew it wasn't the scariest. It's mostly kind of just entertaining and funny. There's still not really a ton of tension, but that's not what you come into this movie for. You're coming to be entertained. You're coming for that over-the-top camp. I would definitely recommend seeing this movie with friends. Seeing it alone might not work as well, but having the crowd of people reacting to it definitely helps. I still have some problems with the editing, especially like the doodles make it feel a little unfocused, and they happen a little too often for my taste. But overall, I would give this a 3 out of 5. I think it's worth watching. Not a perfect movie by any means, but by no means a terrible movie.
All right, well, that gives House of a Thousand Corpses an average rating of 3 out of 5 pods. Stupid fun is the way I would describe this movie, and if you're into stupid fun, definitely worth checking out. All right, so now we're going to jump into Rob Zombie's sequel to House of a Thousand Corpses, the 2005 film Devil's Rejects. I would say sequel is an extremely loose term to describe this film. I think soft reboot is a much more accurate term.
The way I see it, it's kind of like the Evil Dead and Evil Dead 2 sort of situation.
Yeah, that's a great example.
It's like Evil Dead 2 references the first movie, but it changes a lot of stuff where it's like, this is basically a new movie. It's Sam Raimi having a new budget and wanting to tell the same story, and I think that's sort of what happened with Rob Zombie as well.
I mean, sort of. They try to make it a continuation of House of a Thousand Corpses, i.e. just having the cops show up at the Firefly house at the beginning and have an armed standoff.
All the characters are practically the same. The biggest difference is Bill Moseley's character.
I mean, Sid Haig's character is the same, but I would say that Bill Moseley's and Sherry Moon Zombie's character are quite a bit different from their House
I
of a
just
Thousand
think Sherry
Corpses
Moon
characters.
is more defined. I think that she.
Oh, for sure,
does a
but
lot more.
she's also, well, I mean, first of all, her Texas accent is completely gone.
Yeah.
But also she seems to be more calculating and more cold,
Yeah.
and less sort of childish and over the top like she is in House of a Thousand Corpses. And Bill Moseley has inexplicably grown a glorious beard.
Yeah, and regular skin.
And regular skin. He's no longer an albino. So, I mean, this is basically Sid Haig, Sherry Moon Zombie, and Bill Moseley on the run from the police for their years and years of murder.
Yeah, and that's pretty much the story as it is, because I mean, they run into like a singing group at some point, and they also they meet up with Captain Spaulding's brother. But a lot of it is just them.
Yeah, I
going
mean,
on
it's
the
very
run
simple. It's just them on the run, and one of the cops who was killed in the first movie, it's about his brother, played by William Forsythe, who is trying to seek revenge by
Out
any
for
means
revenge,
necessary,
yeah. Right,
and
so-
going well outside the confines of the law.
Well, and you know, that's the thing. In House of a Thousand Corpses, the weakest element was the subplot about the cops mainly and the dad. But in this movie, I think the subplots are the strongest part of the
Well, I
movie.
wouldn't even call the cops the subplot of this. Like, this is very much like a hunt with William Forsythe trying to track down these people who killed his brother and wreak as terrible of a vengeance as he can. But I think the most important distinction between these two movies is the tone, because House of a Thousand Corpses is super campy and over the top, and Devil's Rejects is much grittier and much more serious. It still has several moments of comedic relief, some very, very, very funny moments. But this feels much more like a late 70s grindhouse film.
I would say it's pretty campy in a different way than House of a Thousand Corpses, where it feels like everyone is kind of in on the joke. In House of a Thousand Corpses, it feels like the jokes are happening in this movie, but none of the characters are aware of them.
Well, I would say the campiness in Devil's Rejects confines itself to certain scenes.
I would say certain characters more.
Yeah. I mean, but there's moments where the more serious characters cross into the realm of campiness.
Yeah, that's that.
It's really, I would really more consider it more a scene by scene basis, where like certain scenes are very dark and serious, and then certain scenes are just off the wall ridiculous.
Yeah, that's sort of the formula. A funny scene and then get super intense. And,
Well, there are a couple of
believe
scenes
that.
in general, such as when the police realize that all of the characters from the Firefly family have the names of characters from Marx Brothers
Oh my
movies.
They learned this by
yes.
getting a film professor in.
They bring in a film
as an
professor
expert.
who has a fucking Marx Brothers mustache.
Right, he looks like Groucho Marx.
he looks like Groucho Marx.
And he talks like a maniac too.
And he's so fucking specific, and he's just like quoting and citing specific movies.
My
And-
favorite part is near the end of the scene.
Well,
They
one of
ask-
the cops is like, we should try and talk to this Groucho character.
Yeah, and the film professor, you know, is a little peeved about this because obviously Groucho is dead, but he died like 3 days before or after, within 3 days of when Elvis died.
Yeah.
Film critic is like, yeah, no one remembered it because
That damn
Talentless,
pretty boy.
yeah. Elvis died at the same time, and all the cops just
William
super
Forsythe is
upset.
like, don't you dare say another bad word about the king.
Yeah, no, he's like, the fuck you say about the king?
That was it. The fuck you say about the king? You get on out of here before before I fucking put my boot in your ass.
And the whole, like, they bring him, as you mentioned, because all of the members of the Firefly family had Groucho Marx names, but it really, like, feels so out of place with, like, they're just taking the time to show this film critic. And it's great, too, when they discover that, because they say, we have to get a film critic to try and solve this.
But it doesn't provide them any actual, information on the case. It's more like an excuse to, like, look at Rob Zombie's writing process and acknowledge that he named these characters after Marx Brothers characters,
right.
Which is totally unnecessary, but the scene is so fucking funny.
Yeah, it really is. It's hilarious, and we thought that would be the funniest scene in the movie.
Well, before we get into the actual funniest scene, I just want to take a second to mention the scene where Sid Haig hijacks the car in the clown makeup, and there's like an 8-year-old boy in the driver's seat. He's like, "Do you like clowns?" And the boy's like shaking his head. "Well, you and your mother better make sure that you make yourself clowns by the time I get back, or I'm gonna kill you."
God, still so, like, when this movie does try and get, like, horror serious, it's, for the most part, pretty effective with setting that tone. So,
well, I mean,
it's nice to know, like, they still go gonzo.
Like we mentioned in House of a Thousand Corpses, like, Sid Haig is, as over the top as he is still extremely intimidating.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yes.
And I'm very glad that he's a more central part of this movie than House of a Thousand Corpses, because he's a damn good actor.
Well, I think that because Sherry Moon Zombie, I don't find really compelling. I feel like she's lucky to be married to Rob Zombie.
I think she's much better in this movie than House of a Thousand Corpses.
Yeah, again, that's a low bar to move up from. And also Bill Moseley, I mean, like, he's a very convincing crazy man, but I don't find him
like, that's what he's based his career off of. Like, if you look at his IMDb page, he has exclusively been in B horror movies.
Well, and hey, if you find
five of which have the word devil in their title, including The Devil's Rejects. 5 of the films that he's been in have devil in the title. So, I mean, that tells you what you need to know about Bill Moseley. I think Bill Moseley does a great job. Well, he does what we need out of his character.
But I think without Sid Haig there, this movie would have been significantly less entertaining.
Sure. So like, Bill Moseley and Sherry Moon Zombie do a good job.
They do great in the horror side of, like, what this movie's trying to do. Sid Haig is the comic relief.
But also the scary part. Like, Sid Haig is, even though he has the most comedic moments in this movie, I would still say he's the scariest character.
Well, it's like scary funny. I mean, that he can be intimidating, but it's him screaming his mouth, talking about, "You better paint yourself like clowns."
Right. Well, the shit that he's saying is absolute schlock bullshit, but
he delivers it with conviction.
Well, that's the thing. The way he delivers it is like, oh shit, like, this guy is fucking serious.
Yeah.
Know?
No, I agree
that's
with that
that's the thing that Sid Haig's got, and it's I don't know if it's part of his fucking bug-eyedness, but he
like, seeing old photos of Sid Haig, I wonder,
looks totally different.
Right. He's a very dashing man in those. Like,
the only thing that makes him recognizable in old photos of Sid Haig is the acne scars.
Cheeks, yeah.
It's the acne scars. Yeah, that's all it is.
And it's just like, at some point, like, the 80s must have had a lot of cheeseburgers.
Right. Well, yeah, he gained some weight for sure. But I think
still a great. I
would say in this movie in particular, the 3 of them work really well together.
They definitely give a much more cohesive performance.
They have a great cohesion to the 3 of them as, like, the family characters, where it's like the dynamic between them works and they're all obviously batshit crazy. My problem is that midway through the movie, it seems like Rob Zombie is trying to start making them, like, anti-heroes, sympathetic characters.
I don't know if it really leans all the way towards sympathetic, but
I'd say it does by the end.
more fucked up shit begins to happen to them, and so you see like more of their vulnerable sides.
What they really do is they start to showcase the craziness of William Forsythe as the sheriff, and that he's literally willing to do whatever the fuck he can.
He'll
catch
hire
these
any
people.
film critic that.
Well, he hires the film critic, but he also hires a couple of hitmen played by Danny Trejo
And DDP.
and the glorious Diamond Dallas Page to hunt down these people. But then he also, like, at the shootout at the beginning, they capture Mother Firefly, who's played by a different actress in this one. I can't remember her name. And then, like, midway through the movie, he murders the shit out of her in the jail cell, where he just stabs the shit out of her with a big old knife.
Yep.
And it's like at that point where you're like, well, he's gone beyond the confines of the law and he's acting solely on revenge. And it's at that point where his brutality starts to sort of play as a foil to the Fireflies, and that's sort of the point where it seems like Rob Zombie is trying to make William Forsythe the villain and the Fireflies as like the heroes, which is weird because they're crazy murderers.
Yeah, well, I don't think that they ever really do much to try and like actually justify anything they've done. So in that way, yeah, they're finally up against someone who's willing to just get as like batshit insane and evil as them.
Someone who's as sadistic as they are.
Yeah, sadistic.
Truly.
But I don't think that it ever really excuses what they did in the movie. I will say some of the imagery near the end shows them like in a very happy family sort of
Right.
light,
Well,
which feels odd.
We won't talk about the ending quite yet. We'll revisit this when we get to that point. I want to talk about, before we talk about the funniest scene in the movie, which I do want to get into, let's talk about Ken Foree.
Oh,
Who is I guess I suppose a frequent Rob Zombie collaborator at this point. The great Ken Foree of Dawn of the Dead fame.
Ooh, and also Keenan and Kel fame, which I
didn't watch.
I mean,
Keenan and Kel.
he's credited in over 60 episodes. So
wow.
he was like their teacher or something in school.
I guess that was his shit during the 90s. Yeah, Kel.
Which, hey, I love him in Dawn of the Dead, and I'm happy that
he's
he can
fantastic.
still
He's a
get
great
work.
actor.
Like,
no, I love Ken Foree.
yeah, let him get that Nickelodeon money. Come on.
It's in this movie he plays Sid Haig's brother, which is a stretch because I mean Sid Haig is white and Ken Foree is black. And that's never.
I think that Sid Haig is black. He's just like light skin.
Yeah,
like,
very
super
light
skin.
Excuse me, I never would have guessed that. that is genuinely news to me.
Right. No, well, yeah, they certainly.
Considering that in this movie his children are Bill Moseley and Sherry Moon Zombie, that is wildly news to me. But yeah, so Ken Foree's his brother. And Ken Foree's a pimp of exclusively elderly prostitutes.
Oh, yeah.
And so the three take refuge with him at a certain point, but he gets shaken down by William Forsythe. And now we can get into that fantastic scene because that is relevant. Ken Foree and, oh no, I'm very bad. I've forgotten this actor's name. The guy from The Hills Have Eyes, the original one, the Wes Craven.
It's like Michael Berryman or something like that.
Yeah, something like that. The like mildly deformed, real tall looking guy.
He has no sweat glands.
Which is buck wild. I'm jealous because I'm the sweatiest man. And they go to buy a couple of live chickens off the side of the road because Sid Haig apparently makes the best fried chicken. And when they're going to buy these chickens, the guy who's selling them to him he's like, now wait a minute. are y'all planning to fuck these chickens? Which just descends into absolute madness where Ken Foree's like, you think we're planning to fuck these chickens? Or do you fuck chickens? He's like, well, I've thought about fucking chickens.
It's his delivery, like he's being so earnest about it. And he looks at the cage like, well, I thought about it.
Oh my God.
And it's like, if the film critic scene felt unnecessary, at least that tried to add on to the plot. This is just absolute, like, segue off a cliff.
But it's so fucking perfect. It's my absolute favorite scene in this movie.
Yeah, it hits
100%.
It hits at a moment where things are starting to settle a little more because they've gotten to Ken Foree's like whorehouse. We're waiting for William Forsythe to get there, so that surprise just of that whole.
Well, yeah,
conversation
and
was-
like it goes so over the top with it. He talks about like cutting off their heads.
Oh
and
my God.
fucking
Yeah,
them
you
while
cut
they're
off
just
the head and you
flailing
stick your
wildly.
dick in the neck hole.
yeah, and then it
Like-
goes squaw. God, yeah, that was an insane
It's so
conversation.
macabre and like over the top and sleazy, which works so well for this movie.
That's something Rob Zombie's real good at. He's real good at being sleazy as shit.
Yeah.
Well, and on that topic of sleazy, we didn't mention it with House of a Thousand Corpses, but I guess Rob Zombie must put in the contract for Sherry Moon Zombie, like, you have to show your ass for at least like 3
Seriously.
minutes in a movie, like 3 minutes of screen time. Like, that ass has its own makeup artist at this point.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Like, after watching these 3 movies that we're talking about, I believe that I've seen Rob Zombie's entire filmography aside from El Super Bisto.
And he also did another 31.
all about clowns.
Oh yeah, well
Clown
no, I
Carnival.
didn't see that. But up through Lords of Salem, excluding El Super Bisto, and every single one of those movies except for Halloween 2 prominently shows Sherry Moon Zombie's ass.
Right, it's almost a motif. At a
Like,
certain
it
point.
really feels like a motif, like, oh yeah, you're my wife. Well, it would be great in this scene if you whipped your ass out.
Which
Which feels really sleazy and gross.
I really do, because the only way that it's okay is if Sherry Moon Zombie is not like adamant about showing her own ass. Like,
Well-
if she is a crazy person on set saying everyone needs to see this,
Well, I
then
feel
it's
like
fine.
I feel like she's definitely a crazy person. But
Right, hopefully a crazy one that's okay with flaunting
mean,
her ass on screen.
I would say she's probably fine with it, but that being said, there's no way that it's her idea. It's 100% Rob Zombie
Yeah, which
being
is
like,
just like-
ooh, yeah, baby, you got a great ass. You got great ass. I'll slam that shit in the back of
Yeah,
my
right.
Dragula.
You guys-
Like, let's get that shit on film. It's like, seriously, House of a Thousand Corpses, Devil's Rejects, Halloween 1, Lords of Salem, like, all prominently feature Sherry Moon
And
Zombie's
I'm
ass.
like,
Bare ass.
I saw a Super Beasto back when I was like 13, 14 or something, and I'm pretty sure that there is Sherry Moon ass, or at the
It's
very least-
animated. Do they
Well,
like?
yeah, well,
cartoon
her
Sherry Moon
yeah,
ass?
Yeah, cartoon. No,
Jesus.
it's her cartoon character, but with her real ass superimposed on there. It was in the contract.
So, yeah, note to everybody is that Rob Zombie loves Sherry
Yes.
Moon Zombie's ass.
Professional sleazeball.
Speaking of sleaze, holy shit, that hotel scene. We watched
Oh
the
my
director's
God.
cut. Granted,
Yeah.
so there was 2 extra minutes. In
Right.
it.
Well, we mentioned that they run into a singing group, which is like their first victims in the movie. Husband and wife. This other
and
woman.
another husband and wife.
Well, no, because it's like it's some woman and Brian Posehn. I don't think that I don't think they were
no,
married.
He was a groupie, Brian Posehn, but he was
Well,
the
yeah,
fifth
Brian,
one.
Brian
Oh,
Posehn's,
you're right.
Brian
You're right.
Posehn's the groupie. He's
There was
the
another
groupie.
dude, yeah,
But
with the mustache.
The band is 2 husband-wife couples.
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Yes. And immediately, like they shoot Brian Posehn almost immediately when they show up, which is like that's sort of a shame. Get one of the bigger names out of there. I mean,
He makes a joke about smoking a lot of pot, so, you
Yep.
know, A420 blazer,
yeah, which
whatever.
also it's like he really wasn't putting in any effort in his scenes before when he talked, so he was probably happy to be gone. But it's just them tormenting these people for a good beginning part of the film, and it really veers into just uncomfortable and almost inappropriate.
It goes way, way, way too long.
Yes, and
it never descends into legitimate rape, but it is extremely uncomfortable.
Yeah, Rob Zombie saved that for the Halloween remake. He
right,
held his guns for that.
With Bill Moseley making one of the women strip and then like shoving a gun down the front of her underwear and making her make out with him and shit. And apparently 2 whole minutes of that was cut out for the theatrical release, but we of course watched the director's cut.
We got all the wonderful.
Yeah,
and it's just like we
so
were
sleazy.
We were all like, this is going on way too long.
Well, the thing is, I feel like without that scene being so long, it would be a little easier to sympathize with the family.
Yeah, well, I mean, even so, I guess if you're considering House of Thousand Corpses, like, it's hard to sympathize with these people in general, but you're absolutely right. Like, this scene makes
it's so gratuitous.
It's like by the end where they're trying to like make you feel sorry for the Fireflies, and this scene happened in the same fucking movie, and you're like, why do I feel sorry for these absolute monsters?
Yeah.
And you just don't. Like, that's a problem. There's no way you can feel sorry for these people. That scene goes on way too long. And the part where you're really supposed to, and can you hear my air quotes, feel sorry for them, is once Ken Foree betrays them to William Forsythe, and they get captured, and then he's got this long scene where he's like torturing them in the basement of their house by stapling crime scene photos to their chests.
Yeah, which I was hoping by the end of that scene they would all just be covered up in pictures.
Yeah.
I was hoping so too, but he was just stapling the photos on top of one another while he gets progressively drunker.
Yeah, that's right. He's getting sloshy.
Just shit faced.
And then he dumps gasoline all over them and the house and sets the house on fire, but frees Sherry Moon Zombie so he can hunt her down.
Yes, and
it's like that's that weird point where like she becomes like the victim and she's like running and screaming while William Forsythe is chasing her down, be like, where are you going, baby girl? And considering the shit that she did earlier in the movie, it's like you just have no sympathy for her whatsoever.
The way I look at it, I don't see it as trying to build sympathy. It's just to see how crazy the sheriff has gotten, and I enjoyed it on that end because I like seeing just how outraged, because he starts nailing like Bill Moseley's hands to the chair.
And then like he shoots Sherry Moon Zombie in the leg. And right when he's about to kill her, Tiny shows up.
Yes, which I certainly didn't remember that he was even going to be a part of this movie.
Well, I mean, he wouldn't have been if he hadn't been the first shot of the movie.
Yes, right.
Why, as the cops are showing up, he's dragging a naked and brutalized woman through the dead woman through the forest.
Right. Well, I did not think they would use a tiny ex machina on us for this movie. That he would show up and save the day.
Tiny ex machina.
Tiny ex machina.
No, he really does though. Like right when William Forsythe is about to kill Sherry Moon, Tiny shows up and breaks William Forsythe's neck, and then goes into the house and frees Bill Moseley and Sid Haig, who somehow are not on fire, even though they show William Forsythe dumping gasoline on them physically, and the rest of the house is on fire.
Yeah,
but they're still okay.
All burnt.
Yeah.
And then, as they're leaving, they tell Tiny to wait here, we'll come back for you. And then, inexplicably, in slow motion, he walks into the burning house, and then the house explodes.
It straight up looked like he was like a bomb. Like he walked in.
Seriously,
the second he got in there, it blew up right where he was.
Like they said they were coming back. Why did he walk into the burning house? The ending is something that I have a pretty big problem with.
It's a problem. It's a problem. It is all done to the song "Free Bird." by
Free
Leonard Skinner.
Bird.
Jesus Christ. Well, like, the whole part of Freebird leading up to the breakdown before they inexplicably cut the music, where it's like you feel like they're purposely building up to that. You're absolutely right. A very long scene set to Freebird of them driving down the highway in a convertible in slow motion. Sid Haig is driving? Or is it Bill Moseley?
Bill Moseley.
Bill Moseley's driving, and Sid Haig, who got gut shot earlier, that they sort of just like forget about.
Yeah.
They never address that again. And Sherry Moon Zombie are sleeping in the back seat, and they keep intercutting it with like this home movie style footage.
Yeah. Well, it's
of
like
them
they're
like
really stretching out the time on this.
Well, that's the thing. Freebird's an okay song, but like the build up to Freebird is like
so
5 minutes before the break. So
Freebird is a very, very long song. I don't think we have to explain that to anybody.
yeah, but like they pad the hell out of
But they keep,
the opening
and
there.
they keep showing this home video footage of like the three of them like frolicking in a field,
which I feel was
It's
like
it's like the House of a Thousand Corpses doodles, but not done as well.
But they're like-
because
they're
they're
like-
only there, you know.
but they're like smiling and laughing and putting their arms around each other and posing, and it's like legitimately quite sweet. Except for the fact that these people are psycho killers. And it's like, why are you trying to make me feel sorry for these folks? They have killed literally hundreds of people in horrible ways.
And the way I guess I took that as leaning more towards Rob Zombie's like over sensationalized like take on just like these murderers. Like it just that to me felt like it played into the whole like goofy side of it all. Like these murderers and all the awful intense things that they've done, we're still taking it with a lighthearted tone that's pretty apparent throughout the whole movie. Yeah, I guess if Rob Zombie himself says that it doesn't, it's not meant to be sympathetic,
Which he does, which is absolute horseshit.
I could see where maybe he didn't realize just like how lighthearted he may have taken these characters. It translates near the end.
I'm calling a hard audible on that one. Like, this is so ham-fisted. There is no fucking way that he didn't realize
montage.
what he's doing.
This is basically propaganda right here.
There is
Down
no
with Bill Moseley.
there is no way that he did not realize that these characters are trying to come off as sympathetic.
I feel
and
like
they're
he was
just
trying to
not.
make the character seem super cool by that car chase too. And like in a way that's trying to make the audience sympathize with them. It doesn't work is the problem.
Well, see, the thing is, at this point, his influences come out super hard on his sleeve. He's very open about the Devil's Rejects being influenced by shit like Bonnie and Clyde.
and Badlands
And Badlands and
the
shit
Wild
like
Bunch,
that,
just
where there's these bad, crazy people who you're supposed to feel bad for, and then they end up getting fucked by the cops because
Which,
they
like-
end up getting caught on their killing sprees.
I
Which
get a real Badlands vibe from most of that. Just like, yeah, they did awful things, but they're human.
Well, see, that's the thing. That's the enormous difference between Terrence Malick and Rob Zombie. Is that in Badlands, despite the awful shit that they do, Martin Sheen and Sissy Spacek feel like real people, whereas the Devil's Rejects feel like fucking psycho killers. You know, like, I get the influence, like, cool for him, he likes those good 70s movies.
Or
Like,
at the very least, he knows that they're good, and so he wanted to try and emulate
right,
that.
but he does a terrible job of emulating titillating.
Oh yeah, no, I'll say that
'Cause
it's executed very poorly. in that
It
whole
ends
final.
by them running into a police roadblock. Bill Moseley wakes up Sherry Moon and Sid Haig and hands them guns, and it ends by
Which good
them.
for the police. They're just letting them do that.
Well, they give Sid Haig a shotgun, and they're like a good 100 yards off. So I mean, like, good luck with that, buddy.
Yeah.
And it just ends with them in slow-mo, low frame rate slow-mo.
Right, which like Rob Zombie did slow mo in House of a Thousand Corpses, and it looked fine. But this, like,
This is a lot of like 70s slow-mo, like low frame rate slow-mo.
yeah, a lot of this like veers dangerously into a slideshow. Like,
Right.
it almost just becomes a frame by frame.
And it ends with them just driving full speed into the police
Yeah,
roadblock
Freebird solo blasting.
as Freebird is blaring, firing their guns, and visibly taking multiple fatal gunshot wounds.
Which I think the most inexcusable moment of that whole thing is that they already played the beginning and everything in Freebird, right, until the solo starts breaking. But
Well,
they
right, it
don't
seems-
even follow through. They don't play the whole song.
Exactly. It seems like the way they're building the scene is that they're building up to the breakdown / solo.
And then it ends halfway.
Well, the thing is, they don't even end it when it cuts to the credits. They end the song as they're
Yeah.
driving at the police
Yeah.
roadblock. Like, what was
Bizarre.
the point
It's
of playing
bizarre.
all of the Freebird up till that? We're going to go into a slight tangent and talk about the upcoming third film. But before we do, let's go ahead and rate this. We'll get this out there.
Yeah, I think this movie improves on House of a Thousand Corpses in terms of tone. I think the sleazy, grimy 70s exploitation aesthetic works a little bit better than the Corman aesthetic, especially for me. This movie still has some glaring problems, but it's very entertaining, very campy, very fun. I will give it a 3.5. Try to find the theatrical version if you can.
Yeah, so I would say we watched these films back to back on the same day, and it was my first time seeing both of them. I would say that uniquely for me, I enjoyed The Devil's Rejects about as much as I enjoyed House of a Thousand Corpses, but for different reasons. I still have a lot of problems with The Devil's Rejects. It drags at certain points, and I have a huge problem with them trying to make the Fireflies sympathetic, which just does not work for me on any fucking level. But the more serious, grindhousey tone, the 70s aesthetic, it feels like a much more mature movie. I think Sid Haig and Bill Moseley and Sherry Moon Zombie all together make a really good team. They play off each other well, and I like their characters and I buy their characters. I'm not sympathetic towards their characters, but from a horror film standpoint, I think they make great antagonists. I think William Forsythe as the crazy sheriff is really good. There's a lot of good shit about this movie, but I don't enjoy it any more or less than House of a Thousand Corpses. So I'm also going to give it a 3.5 out of 5. Equally good, but for different reasons, different types of people, different aesthetic.
For me, House of a Thousand Corpses is good only on a funny level. I don't think it really tries to do anything too scary, but it's certainly it's closer to a comedy than it is to a horror movie. Where Devil's Rejects finds a better middle ground between those two things, and maybe not scary, but certainly more intense, which I think shows that, I mean, all those movies that Rob Zombie watched, it seemed to leave a good influence on how he delivered this sequel of sorts. And so definitely a step up from House of a Thousand Corpses, sillier things aside, and that ending, which just really drags, again showing that he doesn't know how to stick the landing. So I'm going to give it a 3 out of 5.
So that will give The Devil's Rejects an average rating of 3.3 pods out of 5. Similar to House of a Thousand Corpses, but likable for different reasons.
Yeah.
before we get into our last film of the day, we're going to take a second to talk a little bit more about the impending sequel to The Devil's Rejects.
Number three from Hell. So Devil's Rejects came out in 2005.
Yep.
So this movie just finished shooting in the past, month?
Yeah,
so?
I believe just a couple days ago, but it was only announced, I think, like a month or two ago. So
Yeah.
I guess Rob Zombie's been really keeping it under wraps.
We definitely talked about this in a news segment of one of our previous episodes.
Yeah, but it's still pretty recent news.
Yeah, no, it is, and I think it's important to talk about for a couple of minutes, just because, frankly, I'm confused about the continuation of this, considering that I think it's fairly obvious that they all died at the end of Devil's Rejects.
Yeah, well, they're absolutely going to come back from hell.
But we didn't see...
Three from Hell.
We didn't see a final shot of Bill Moseley or Sid Haig going, "Oh, I'm dead," and then dying. So,
Also, Sid Haig
they were taking gunshot wounds to, the neck.
Sid
Maybe it
Haig
didn't
is
hit
going to be
anything vital.
old as fuck. In the
Sid Haig is, in his early 80s.
Yeah.
I admire the fuck out of this guy to keep on acting, even though he's this old, but... Man, I just can't imagine that he'd be believable doing anything in this film.
I guess I would say that I'm optimistically curious about this movie, considering how I feel about the previous two. I just think that there's no fucking way that they can make this movie believable unless they delve into campiness. It's called Three from Hell, so I'm fucking damn well expecting these three folks to come back from literal hell.
Well, it's interesting. House of a Thousand Corpses feels very much like a homage to 60s exploitation, whereas Devil's Rejects feels like a love child of the 70s. So I wonder if Three from Hell is almost going to pull influences from the 80s.
God, I hope so. If he can continue that sort of through line, that would be fantastic. I just hope that he doesn't take it too seriously, because, and we'll get into this with our next review of Lords of Salem in a few minutes, but in recent years, Rob Zombie has started taking himself far too seriously.
Right, well,
and I think that started with Halloween, and if this film, if Three from Hell ends up being, real serious, I think it's gonna be real bad.
Well, I think that's one reason why I don't feel as optimistic about it, is because after Devil's Rejects, it was mildly well received. I think a lot of people saying it's definitely better than House of a Thousand Corpses. But at a certain point, he was able to get attached to Halloween, as we mentioned, the remake, and while we all thought it was pretty bad, it made a decent amount of money in the box office, and it was sort of Rob Zombie's, it was I'm sure a big break for him. It's like, I'm making Hollywood movies now. And then he did Halloween 2, and that was also garbage, but made a good amount of money.
Worse garbage.
Yeah. I think that's definitely been a negative on the trajectory that could have been the rest of his career. Because Thousand Corpses, funny. Devil's Rejects, funny horror. And Halloween, bad horror. And
Not funny.
And he's lost, it seems, that charm.
Yeah, it seems like his sense of humor is virtually gone.
And the things in these movies that are, I guess, meant to be funny, just it's not funny.
So I'm hoping that with Three from Hell, he's gonna recapture some of that sense of fun that he obviously has had before, based on these two movies that we just talked about. But I'm very concerned that it's just going to be dour, serious bullshit.
I just hope Sid Haig can perform as well as he did in those other movies.
Hey, as far as I'm concerned, if Sid Haig is still willing to get in front of the camera, he's going to give us that good shit. I think so. I have faith in Sid Haig. If we can get a good over-the-top Sid Haig performance out of Three from Hell, then even if the rest of it is absolute trash, I'll consider that a win, honestly. Sid Haig is old. We're not going to get many more performances out of Sid Haig. So if he can still fucking get in front of the camera and put that shit on, more fucking power to him.
Oh, yes. So with Rob Zombie's movie career, we had Halloween 1, Halloween 2, and then I believe he didn't do anything else until our next movie, which came out in 2013, right?
2011, I believe, actually.
2011?
Yeah. Or
Really?
2011, 2012.
This is Lords of Salem. Sherry Moon Zombie has moved up from supporting character to lead character.
Lead ass.
Yeah, lead ass.
Lead
yes.
ass. Her ass is featured very prominently in this movie.
Yeah,
Just
we were
In one of the
we were
first
wondering-
shots we
yes,
see.
because we were wondering
her.
how long it would take and if it would even happen to see her ass. And yeah, it does not.
I even
within
said I was willing to
minutes.
put money on it, and it's like 5 minutes into the movie. One of the opening shots is her fucking ass. Yeah, this is a 2012 film. Man, I was optimistic going into this based off of my experiences from House of a Thousand Corpses and Devil's Rejects. I regret my optimism.
Well, the story.
I hate this movie.
I definitely think it's which is crazy that I'm saying this, but I think it's the weakest out of the three movies that we watched, and a lot of that is because
I think it's the worst Rob Zombie movie I've seen. I think it's worse than Halloween 2.
really.
Oh,
Whoa!
wow.
I think it's been a
now
lot.
I
And
will-
I haven't
been
seen
a-
Halloween 2, so
It's
I
been a
can't really
long
speak
time
on
since
that, but-
It's been a long time since I've seen Halloween 2, but I think I hated this film more than Halloween 2.
I won't agree with that because I don't even think it's worse than Halloween. So
Shit! I absolutely think this is worse than Halloween.
I the biggest problem with this movie is that it leans again just to being straight horror movie, and I don't think Rob Zombie is as scary as he thinks.
Well,
There
I think
is nothing campy or fun about this movie.
There are a couple of interesting concepts within
Yes.
it, but they're just executed so poorly that it just becomes a jumbled, poorly executed mess as a whole.
Here's the thing. Rob Zombie cannot write.
No,
Dialogue especially.
Dialogue especially. I think Rob Zombie has good ideas. I think he's a decent director, but this motherfucker cannot write. That's something that we didn't really touch much on in House of a Thousand Corpses and Devil's Rejects, but the writing is not good in either of those movies. But there's other things that carry them. Whereas this movie, the writing is horse jizz, and there's nothing that carries it aside from the cinematography and the production design. That's the only thing I would say that Lords of Salem has going for it is visually beautiful.
Well, the premise of the movie is Sherry Moon Zombie.
Premise is a generous word.
Hold on, there's a plot throughout this
There's
movie.
a
I don't
through
think
line,
it's
it's just
right.
poorly executed.
Right, I don't think it's as
I would-
loose as you might be saying, but
I would barely call it a plot.
well, because
but anyway,
when you first said this, you said that it was just basically like a Rosemary's Baby ripoff, and it's not really that. It's
I mean,
no, because it's going for like what Sherry Moon Zombie's character is.
it's a
much
cult
more
of
important.
scary old people impregnating a woman with the devil's
But
child.
the impregnation is not important to the movie at all. It's more about Sherry Moon Zombie is a descendant of this priest back during the Salem witch trials who burned a whole bunch of witches, and one of them cursed him so that one of his descendants would end up becoming a part of the witch cult.
would bear the spawn of Satan.
And I think more like take up, sort of like a leadership type of role, because you see at the end, I mean, there's the imagery of her that shows that she's sort of absorbed this
as like the satanic Virgin Mary.
Yeah, well,
I don't think she really takes a leadership role. She bears the spawn of the devil.
But I again, like the baby part is like such a minute part of the film, and it puts much more focus onto what Sherry Moon Zombie's character is going through. She's a recovering heroin addict or something like
a crack addict.
Crack addict.
Because she smokes crack midway
right.
through the movie.
And so when these strange things start to happen to her, like she starts seeing these visions, and ghosts like walking through her house. A lot of people around her sort of first take it as like, oh, she's using again. She's back on that stuff.
Well, she works at this really cornball radio show.
Right. With Ken Foree is another one of the hosts there, which showing up again.
If you can believe it, this radio show is like way worse than our podcast. Like, holy shit.
Well,
Yeah,
it's
if you
funny,
can imagine
it's
that.
funny. They are the least energetic radio host I think I've ever heard.
And they also have no cohesive theme, because when they start, it seems like they're maybe like a metal radio station.
yeah, they show like
because
a black metal band.
Because the first thing they're doing is like they show a black metal music video and they're like interviewing this guy who's in a black metal band, but then immediately after that they're playing like soul funk, and then after that they're playing Rush. There's just no cohesion to it whatsoever.
Kind of reminded me of WFMU in the East Coast. They kind of have a free-for-all radio thing that people just play anything on. But the weird thing is the radio hosts were like a weird combination of like NPR meets like shitty
NPR meets Howard
soundboard.
Stern.
Yeah.
Oh my God, the
complete with the
soundboards.
soundboard.
Constant. Like, I don't think radio shows, like in real life, use a soundboard that much because it's like,
Well, yeah, it's
after
the kind of
every
thing-
line,
Exactly.
There's a fucking sound effect going
No,
on.
you're spot on the money. Every single line they say is accompanied by something from a soundboard, and it's fucking infuriating.
I mean, I thought it was kind of funny.
Well, I
It was
thought-
kind of funny. It was
I thought,
kinda
well,
funny.
no. I thought it was kind of funny at first, and then they kept doing it, and now I'm like, oh, fuck off. Fuck off.
I didn't mind all that because I took these characters as sort of obnoxious. Like, I don't think
Yeah.
that they weren't meant to be wholly like sympathetic.
Ken
or,
Foree seems so tired throughout that
Yeah,
whole
no,
radio.
He does
care.
basically nothing.
Yeah.
It's mostly Sherry Moon Zombie and the other guy who's basically Dave Grohl.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it feels like he's kind of sleepwalking through this movie, just totally phoning it in.
Right, like, even Sherry Moon Zombie is, like-
everybody in this movie feels like they're phoning it in. Also, like, Sherry Moon Zombie has white people dreadlocks, and it's a bad
Yeah,
fucking
that's
look.
one thing we should emphasize.
Right,
That's
it's
probably
not
the
even-
most distracting thing in
It's
the movie.
not even anything to do with a cultural appropriation because we know it's just because white people don't want to wash their hair.
Well,
It's
but-
it looks awful on her.
Really,
so.
really, what it feels like for me is that, like, she's been married to Rob Zombie for a long time, and Rob Zombie has had dreadlocks since, like, the late 80s.
Yep.
And at a certain point in the late aughts, Sherry Moon Zombie was like, oh, I'm gonna grow dreadlocks to match you, Rob. And it's a bad fucking look. It's fucking terrible. She
Certainly,
looks...
I believe that she's a recovering crack addict with that
Yeah,
look.
she looks fucking terrible.
It does complete the junkie look, in fairness.
But I can't take her character seriously at all. I think there's much less of a plot in this movie than you guys do. It's basically Sherry Moon Zombie. Like you said, Sherry Moon Zombie is the descendant of this guy who gets cursed by some witches back in the Salem witch trials days. And she gets sent some very repetitive music on a vinyl. And then some witches make her bang the devil if the devil was a midget.
With
And-
like flaccid tentacle penises.
Jesus
Two
Christ.
of them.
Jesus
That she
Christ.
just, like,
that she just
double
literally
fists?
that she just shakes around and then she's pregnant and then it oh man.
It's like a hentai.
All that stuff happens like during the last like 30 minutes, so that's not even what the film is really built on.
But there's barely anything building up to that other than Sherry Moon Zombie's slow descent into not even madness, lackluster.
Well, you had the three anti-neighbors.
Yeah,
Right,
well,
who
which
all,
feels like
when the record is played over the over the radio station, we see all of them and they sort of just stop as it's
also
going on.
like this tune that keeps being played is something that was like written down in the diary of Sherry Moon Zombie's ancestor, but it is like 3 notes played in like a 5 or 6 note sequence. It's the most uncreative, obnoxious, repetitive shit.
It's something that Rob Zombie came up with in the studio, and it's like, that would be really scary.
He was sitting at his fucking keyboard, and he played 3 notes in a minor key and was like, oh yeah, I'm into that.
Yeah, I make music.
Yeah, I make music.
Yeah, I make music. I'm good at this.
Remember Dragula?
Yeah, remember Dragula? It's been like over a decade.
You love Dragula. And I'm like, yes, Rob Zombie, I do love Dragula. But for as long as this movie is, there's so little to it. Like, the entire last third is just like surrealist nonsense. And I love...
Well, like, my biggest thing is, like, what about this is so inexcusable when the last 2 movies we've seen have really just been all, like, absurd with, low substance characters at all? Because this...
I can answer that question.
Because I think that this movie is Rob Zombie trying to genuinely make a scary movie, and I can appreciate a lot of the things that he's trying to do now. It's not meant to just be schlock. It's not meant to like make you laugh.
It does feel more
problem.
like a sincere horror movie, but
That's
the problem
is
he can't execute it.
He can't.
No,
He
but
doesn't have that skill.
What makes House of a Thousand Corpses and The Devil's Rejects work is the schlock. I mean, Devil's Rejects, to a much lesser extent, that's much more serious, and he does it well. But The Lords of Salem is totally 100% devoid of fun. There's nothing fun about it. And Rob Zombie, even in his music career, like, his thing is over the top theatrical satanic nonsense.
Well, I think
that's the shit that he's good at, and this has the satanic nonsense without the fun.
Well, I think that a lot of that translated over into the visual style of the movie. It's
the production design and the visuals, fucking fantastic. I will absolutely give this movie that. It looks incredible, and the last 30 minutes, which is basically totally devoid of story, looks great. There's some really cool set pieces. The art design is really excellent. Like, they put work into it. It's visually stunning, but there's nothing behind it, and so it just comes across as totally hollow and uninteresting. Like, it's nice to look at, but what else is there?
Well, I mean, you do have the through line of the Salem expert who finds the stuff and goes to investigate. And he goes to investigate the ants and, like...
Totally
unnecessary. Oh, yeah, well, and then the conversation that he has with, like, the head witch girl, and she's like, I'm not gonna let you near her, because you're gonna put bad idea... You want to get into her
head. You're
head.
gonna fuck her mind.
You're like, you want to take your...
Yeah, you're gonna put your dick in her brain.
Right, yeah, what turns
like,
into...
an actual fucking quote from the movie is like, you're not gonna put your dick in her brain. You're not gonna fuck her mind. And it's just like, what is this?
It's like, so with moments like that, and also with their whole radio show thing, I think Rob Zombie, like, there's still that sense, like, he can still do goofiness, but his intentions behind this were to try and make a more atmospheric film. I sort of give him credit for trying. I don't think that this is a good movie. I'm not trying to defend this very much, but I think that there's a lot more going for it than you might have gotten out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I really got nothing out of this movie. I feel like that it does not work on any standpoint aside from visual. Visual, it hits the nail on the head, but from an acting and story and dialogue standpoint, it just flies so far past my fucking face. The closest it comes to that campy schlock that I was looking for is that scene where she's like, you're not gonna put your dick in her brain.
And we can't forget the scene after she encounters the midget slob thing, when she wakes up, because obviously it's like a dream sort of thing. And she goes back to bed, and then it just sort of like walks into the frame from the side.
And I mean,
no, I like,
that was probably the funniest part.
That shit was hilarious.
It doesn't justify any of that other stuff.
It's
but that
stupid.
It doesn't feel like it fits.
Her honestly, from a design standpoint, her bedroom infuriated me, and maybe this is a little minor thing, but like both of her end tables were like 100% lights.
Yeah,
and they were just glowing. And behind her bed, she had this massive mural of like the Georges Millet,
Trip to the moon.
the moon with the
moon trip.
Yeah, the trip to the moon,
With
like
the
the
rocket
picture
in the
of the
eye.
moon with the rocket stuck in its eye, and that to me just felt so much like Rob Zombie saying like, "I've studied film history, and look at this, I like movies," and it's just like, but there's no point for it otherwise. Maybe that's just a minor thing, but that was really frustrating for me.
You're just upset. Well, and also, I think you're upset with their representation of black metal in the movie, because when the first interviews that they have with a black metal guy, he's just very like stereotypical, like, we hate the church and we love Satan.
I was upset with their representation of black metal during that scene. And even when you mentioned it later in the movie, I even admit that I had forgotten about it at that point. So I'm not even
Yeah,
gonna...
well, it's so minor that like it's not mentioned again.
No, it's
unfortunately.
I mean, it just... All I'll say is it goes to show is that Rob Zombie has zero understanding of black metal. But it's such a minor part of the movie that it's totally insignificant.
Yeah.
There's just nothing to this fucking movie for me. Like, as it goes along, as Sherry Moon Zombie gets sucked more and more into this witch coven, she just becomes less charismatic and seems like she's phoning it in more, and basically both literally and figuratively sleepwalks through the entire last third of the fucking movie. And I mean, the visuals look great, and there's that stupid part where she's riding a goat in slow motion, which looks very pretty, but it makes no sense. And then at the end, she gives birth to a child full of tentacles.
Yeah, well, one of the most infuriating sections for me is when her radio co-host /
Dave Grohl?
Dave Grohl looking guy, he comes to see how she's doing, and she like hugs him, and then one of the neighbors are like, she doesn't want to talk to you, go back in your room, and he kind of gets led out by one of the women, and then the next shot you see is her walking with him through an alley to the backstage door of a theater.
Well, that's where the show is happening, the Lords
Yeah.
of Salem show. So I think they wanted her to go over there and all that. Which
It
also
just-
that's
it felt
funny
like
that
a
they,
weird sequence
well,
where
that they had that free show, that's how they're gonna get people. And I mean, there's like 9 people in the
There's
well,
audience.
shows how many people listen to their radio show.
Yeah, right. And
gonna
also, it's
be-
like I would have been pissed because they start off the whole like. I mean, if they're supposed to be a band, they start with this whole like, and they repeat it earlier in the movie. It's just like I guess some like chant or like declaration to Satan. And I would have been pissed in that audience. I would have been like, this was free, but I want my refund.
I'm going to be 100% candid. I fell asleep 3 times during this movie.
And maybe that's why you have trouble following the plot.
Yeah, but if I fell asleep 3 times during this movie, what does it say about the effectiveness of this film, though?
Well, I think one big problem we're probably hoping for something closer to House of a Thousand Corpses. Or
I was hoping
Devil's
for
Reject.
something fun, and it just was not
Well, but
fun.
that's like the problem right there. Like this, I got this idea really from the get go. Like this was going to be more closer to a horror movie, which it's like not a good horror movie. The fact that there wasn't a lot of comedy in it didn't bother me because I sort of
Yeah,
went
it
into
didn't
with
really
that
bother me
understanding.
that much. The problem with it is Zombie can't execute a good horror movie. Rob Zombie. Rob Zamboni.
Robert Zombert.
Rob Zombie just can't execute a good horror movie, so it just becomes super sloppy, unfocused, and messy. Like,
Well, yeah, that's the thing. It's like there's an obvious downshift in the quality of his fucking movies from Halloween onward, where it's very obvious that he just takes himself so fucking seriously.
But still,
that-
I feel like this had like so much more going for it than the Halloween remake did.
I
Because
cannot.
With the Halloween remake, it's like it leaves you with a sour taste in your mouth because it's just so like bleak. But with this one, it's going for that horror tone. But with those moments, like with them in the radio show, and I think some of the visuals, I think it's trying to do something that I can give it credit for much more than I can do with fucking up the Halloween franchise.
I guess I can give it credit for some of its larger ideas, but it feels
like I'm not trying to give it a very high bar. I just thought it was better than the Halloween remake.
Well, no. That's the shit I'm on too. Like as much as I disliked the Halloween remake, I think that at least it felt somewhat cohesive, like it was trying to do something, even if it didn't particularly land in what it's trying to do.
Because it's an adaptation, it has that through line built in,
like,
where
it
it
doesn't
can't be as
guarantee-
unfocused as
But the
was.
Lords of Salem did not feel like it had that. It felt like that it had some ideas that it was trying to hint at, but did such a bad job of like leading you into those ideas. It felt so unfocused and so incohesive that it just does nothing for me. Like by the end of it, like when the credits rolled, I was just like, okay, like I don't fucking care. I don't fucking care.
It's another bad ending. There's a moment when it could have ended and it would have been bad.
Yeah, Rob Zombie
and then it decided,
is incapable of ending
It decided to go on longer and still be a bad ending. So
like, it looks nice. The production design is cool, but I mean, the Halloween remake looks nice too. Like, at least I can give it.
Yeah, but everything that Rob Zombie added into the Halloween remake are bad choices. At least with Lords of Salem, I like at least this is him just trying to do something on his own, like not attached to anything else, and just to see how he can do with that.
I mean, that's fair. It feels like
like I'm only saying that it's better than Halloween. I'm not saying it's a good movie.
Yeah.
No, and that's what I'm saying too. I don't think it's better than Halloween, but neither of them are good movies as far as I'm concerned.
Right. So
should we?
It's a trash.
Let's just jump into rating.
Should we rate this?
We're running in circles at this point. For me, this movie was an unfocused mess. There's a smidgen of an idea here that would work well as a movie, but it's just so poorly executed that it just falls straight on its face. Sherry Moon Zombie is very distracting with dreadlocks, and it's not a good look. You can see the Rosemary's Baby influences and like all these different influences that Rob Zombie has in the movie. The thing is, he takes visuals from them without giving them any purpose. And that's my biggest problem with it. I would honestly probably have to give it a 2 out of 5. There are a couple of redeeming things to it. Mostly the concept of the record being used as kind of a conduit was kind of a cool idea. Some of the visuals were interesting, but besides that, not really worth checking out. 2 out of 5 for me.
Yeah, I would say this feels like a visual collection of notes that somebody scribbled down in a notebook. It does not feel like a full cohesive film. Visually, it's excellent. Whoever they got on their production design, the art design, it looks fantastic. It's very well shot. But there's no real story to be told as far as I'm concerned. There's lots of moments where Rob Zombie is blatantly trying to be scary and it comes across as desperate. Like the couple of intended jump scares in the movie are not even jump scares. They're so predictable. It just is such a fucking mess. And I mean, I'll give it a 2 out of 5 for the visuals, but
I thought you were gonna go much harder than that.
No. The way you were talking about it.
like visually and art design wise, like it's a feast for the eyes. Like it looks good. It's like there's some very cool visual ideas, but from a storytelling standpoint and from an acting standpoint, it just feels so stiff and not thought out and just incomplete, and it's just a mess. And I don't like this movie, but I'll give it a 2 out of 5 for its visuals.
interesting. I think we all feel a little differently about this movie. I feel like I enjoyed it a little more than you guys, while I still felt, there are a lot of really boring parts, I guess. I just felt like with the past two movies that we watched, I mean, all of these movies are like really dumb. And so I guess I didn't mind watching a dumb horror movie rather than like a dumb horror comedy. I mean, I'm gonna give it a 2 out of 5 as well. It's certainly not better than House of a Thousand Corpses, which is, I mean, a sad thing to say. I think that it could satisfy a lot of people if they're looking for something to check out. If they want to see, I guess if you liked Halloween, I think you'll probably like Lords of Salem.
I think I can agree with that. All I'll say to close that out is that I have no problem with dumb as long as the dumb is fun. If the dumb is over serious, I just can't deal with it. Like, if you're gonna go dumb, go fun. That's what House of a Thousand Corpses has going for it. Is it's extremely dumb, but it's fun at least. And Devil's Rejects has a lot of those points too.
Yeah,
but Lords of Salem
and the thing is,
doesn't.
I even give a pass sometimes to dumb movies if they're tight and focused. If they're straight to the point, no nonsense, I can give it the time of day to be a little dumb.
Yeah,
the
like
problem
not
is this
a
is just
focused
not
movie.
focused at all and dumb. So
Well, that's a unanimous 2 out of 5 pods for the Lords of Salem. We do not have a game this week on this episode because
we do have an email.
we have an email.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
shit.
What?
We do.
What?
No,
This is
fucking
news
way.
to us.
Oh my god, I feel like, oh shit.
This is a big deal. We have one email.
We got an email from John. He asks whether we think it's better to listen to our reviews before or after you watch the movie.
Oh, I mean, I would say after, because I think we get into a lot of spoiler talk, so...
I would say it depends on how recent the film is. If it's a newer film, then after. If it's an older film, we're well beyond the realm
But
of...
sometimes we talk about older movies that are, like, they're worth watching with a clean slate, so I think...
Yeah, maybe, but I feel like sometimes what we say is an encouragement to watch a movie that you might not have seen
You
before.
know what? Eugene says before or after.
Well, Matisse says it depends, Eugene.
What about you,
Don't watch
Ben?
movies. They're a waste of time.
Just don't watch them at all. Just
Just
rely
listen
on
to our
us.
podcast.
All right, I think that's good.
We'll
answers
watch
all
the
around.
movies for you.
Yeah, we're watching the movies for you.
Yeah, why do you think we started this podcast?
Well, like I said, we don't have a game this week. Next week, you can expect another mini pod that will be a review that we recorded a couple of weeks ago for a French-Canadian zombie film on Netflix called Ravenous. And boy, do we have some opinions on this one. I'm not going to spoil anything for you. It's a pretty short episode, but that's what you can expect next week. If you like the show, you can give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. We'd really appreciate that. Help us work our way up in the charts a little bit. You can email us with any questions, comments, concerns, recommendations at podpeoplepod@gmail.com. Also, you can hit us up on Facebook or Twitter at PodPeoplePod for both of those websites. We're lonely and we want your sweet and tasty words.
Yeah, Eugene, how's the massage business treating you?
Well, since last time I said I was back in business, but with the snow and everything, it's like
How is it snowing in fucking April? Welcome to Wisconsin.
Yeah,
God damn
God.
it!
It's just been awful weather, and so it's really been affecting my business, because I would hand out like samples on the street, so I would just go up to behind people, like rub them, and ask them like, are you gonna pay me to do this more?
Sample rubs, yeah.
But now
of
when I do it,
course.
like they're running away, so they slip, and I'm getting sued by like 3 people now because they're like, he was trying to kill me, and I'm like, no, I just want to touch you. And so I mean, all I'm gonna say is this:
How
like,
are they gonna accuse you of trying to kill them if you weren't even holding a knife?
I wasn't
It's probably
even-
that
well,
hook
I
arm.
was. I did have my hook arm that day because people who might not
yeah.
remember from earlier episodes, I did eat my hand And so that
During Thanksgiving,
I
yeah,
never
we
thought
remember
about
this.
this, but that might be why people say my hands are like really clammy because it's fake.
You're
So I didn't think about
giving
that.
massages with a hook hand, so that might be the issue.
You know what? All of this makes a lot more sense with the police and everything. I have not changed this. It's still been the hook hand. So,
And your hook does have some dried blood on it. I must say, it's not a particularly appealing hook for strangers.
I use this to open up a can of tomato sauce. I love my spaghetti. All I will say is like, give me a week just to get a new hand, and then I will rub you. Just don't be sad.
Oh, well, the show is produced and scored by Ben and edited by me. If you want to follow me on Twitter, I'm at Mr. Van Awesome. If you want to follow Ben, he's at Mr. Sheets. Our Twitters are nonsense if you want to get in on that shit. But thank you, as always, for listening. We love and appreciate all of the folks. Send us more emails, suggestions, questions, all of it. We will hit you back. We're desperate and lonely, and we want your love because we love you too.
2 last-minute video recommendations. If you watch this podcast, there is a great news story about a skate park that was built in basically Rob Zombie's backyard that he's very upset about.
He's very upset about it.
And it's very funny. Also, there is a MTV2 commercial, I think it is, where Rob Zombie is coincidentally teaching Jamie Foxx how to skateboard, and more importantly, how to ollie. He does a sick ollie, which kind of goes against the whole anti-skateboarding thing.
Yeah,
first
right.
of all,
It's one of the most entertaining
But
things I've ever seen.
it is
in my
incredible.
life.
I haven't seen a
Jamie
commercial
Foxx's
quite as good.
face
since.
is just...
That's gonna be the episode thumbnail, I think.
Yeah, so until next time, dig through the ditches, burn through the witches.
Fuck all the bitches.
In the back of that Dragula.
And get your complimentary chicken.
Bye!